Great. Thank you, everybody. So it's really exciting today as part of the work of NUICC to invite and make space for so many guests to join us to talk about not just how we include urban Indigenous youth in programming, but the work that we do to empower youth in our organizations and programming and policy development and lives generally. We hope that you will continue to join us as we host a series of digital lectures and workshops and discussions on a range of topics over the next few months that engage coalition members on what Indigenous knowledges are and how we carry it in all of its forms into the work that we do, including research and policy and programming and decision making. And it's with the hope that by sharing our practices and successes and challenges that we foster skills and knowledge that lead to positive and meaningful benefits for urban Indigenous communities across the country. And these sessions that we've been doing and conversations that we've been having will continue to live in toolkits that will be released later this year. And this is part of other work that the Indigenous Knowledge Mobilization Hub is doing. As you'll see in the chat, we've also started a call for papers for a journal that's going to be coming out later this year as well. So there's lots of good learning and sharing that's happening within this part of the work of NUICC. And we're grateful for so many amazing speakers today who have an incredible amount of experience in engaging and empowering urban Indigenous youth. Erwin, if you want to put up the slide for the agenda for today. It's a busy day, and I know that it's always easier for me to visualize where we're going than it is to hear about it. Okay, so for our flow of the day today, our first discussion will be with Leanne Ireland from the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth in Calgary, and Jessica Slater, who is currently the Director of Indigenous Programs with the Vancouver Foundation in BC, which is where I am located today, but also has a wealth of experience with Skookum Surrey that she will be sharing as well. And then following their discussion, we will have a 5-minute break for the interpreters, and then we will come back together for questions and discussions for about 15 minutes with Jessica and Leanne. Then we have 2 amazing youth coming to share their experiences with us, and then we'll close with breakout rooms so that you all have an opportunity to discuss the ideas shared here today. And that's a lot going on. So if folks feel comfortable, I'm going to turn it over to Leanne to start this busy and exciting day of sharing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leanne Ireland. I'm at Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth, which is located in Calgary. Just call it USAY. I'm a mixed race person. My family is initially Anishinaabe, and yeah, and I am speaking on behalf of USAY and some of our different projects that we do. So if you wouldn't mind flipping the slide. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. I've had terrible internet connection, so I have to have somebody else be my slide person. So a little bit about USAY. USAY is an Indigenous-led charitable organization. We support urban Indigenous youth ages 12 to 29 that live in the city of Calgary. We talk about youth 12 to 29, but primarily our programs focus on youth that are high school age, sort of 15 to 22. Our programs are often described as eclectic, and that means that we just have sort of more of your conventional charitable activities, but we also have lots of art, technology. We obviously do a lot of research projects, and I like to say that it's art meets technology meets Indigenous worldview. So if you wouldn't mind switching the slide. I thought specifically because this is about policy and information gathering that I would talk a little bit about our information gathering projects, but obviously I encourage you to check out USAY's program page on our website, because we do lots and lots of different projects, and so this does not in any way cover sort of the majority of the work that we do in our organization. So I am so sorry, my dog is about to bark because somebody's here from Amazon. Sorry. One of the things from working from home. Arrow. Sorry, just 1 second. I apologize. I'm so sorry. The joys of working from home, and I had this brilliant idea that I would get a puppy, and so so he barks, and every day around this time somebody drops off a package and he barks, so I apologize. So our projects are mostly focused around understanding Indigenous youth perspectives, particularly on topics with the goal of like improving systems or services. So some of those projects have included things like understanding the different pathways to Indigenous youth educational attainment. So we did a comparative study on whether or not what kind of supports that Indigenous youth that had graduated had received, and what kind of supports those that had left school early received, and sort of comparing what those would look like and how we could create programmatic supports and components to improve youth attaining education. We've done things like youth space consultations. So what would a youth hub look like in the city of Calgary? We've worked on a refresh plan for the youth homelessness and Calgary's plan to end homelessness in the city. So talking to those that are houseless and figuring out what supports they would need to have stable housing. We've done different evaluations for different programs. One was a 4-year evaluation with Circle of Supports. We recently just did the Indigenous literacy assessment. So talking to Indigenous adults about their literacy and what the impact is. One of those wonderful things I found so enlightening from that is that those that had good literacy were like 8 times more likely to have a book in their home as children. And I always just think little tidbits of information like that are so exciting. And then we've just finished a distinction-based health survey and report to help understand what we need to do to improve health systems in the country. So our information gathering tends to be very broad and diverse. And I mean, this is just like a few examples I chose off the top of my head, but we do lots of different research gathering projects. Okay, you can click on the next slide. So we've learned a few things over doing all of this stuff. One is different considerations that I'm sure everyone's really aware of about things that you need to consider while you're, oh, sorry, slower, please. We've learned things about things that you need to get, like information gathering considerations. So how to engage and recruit youth to research gathering, circle process and reiteration, inclusion of elders, the I'm going to really focus on the evolution that we've taken away from comparative statistics. So like comparing Indigenous to non-Indigenous people, and sort of information, innovative ways that we are disseminating these days. So you can just click to the next slide. So some considerations when gathering information is, obviously you said that we did a literacy. So we use the Alberta Reading Park Literacy to determine that 90 that we work with have a 1B literacy rate, a foundational reading level. So that was really important so that we knew that we needed to use plainer English when we had the opportunities to provide like sit down conversations and lean more on oral tradition versus written ways, or you know, reading a high level of reading comprehension skills with the surveys and written components that we do. The next thing was historical context. So we know that 84% of the youth and people that access our services or that are part of our information gathering have been involved in some sort of colonial system. And this might mean that their parents, grandparents were part of day schools or the 60s scoop or residential school, and they themselves might have been part of child welfare or other systems that they felt like have an impact on them. And so maybe it's not even just historical context, it's more just context in general. So being aware that that is a space in which our youth exists is really important to how we begin to collect information. And then we have this idea of that we've learned about reciprocity. So like $25 honorariums when asking for someone to sit down for an hour or more, or fill out or think about different information in different ways. Maybe isn't like the best amount, or thinking about minimum wage, or doing all of these different things. Being cognizant of what you're asking and viewing the information that youth are giving you and the information you're sharing with them as a reciprocal relationship, and considering them experts in their field and experts in their experiences, and honoring them with appropriately compensating them for their time. You can click on the next slide. One of the things that we often think about is, how do you get people to engage and stay engaged? So obviously it's about relationship building, actively taking an interest in their opinion, creating comfortable spaces and comfortable language, and building a mutual understanding of what it is that they're contributing to and why it's important. And I think that one of the issues is, if you can't provide an environment where you have a relationship where you can talk to people in a way that builds comfort, then you need to partner with someone who can meet those requirements. And that's been one of the things that we've really worked on in our organization, like not just asking people like, what's your opinion on health, or what's your literacy? It's about building a relationship with people and then asking them for information that could improve services in our communities. Okay, next slide. I'm not very good at slow talking. I apologize. I'll try my best to slow down. One of the things that's really important is circle process. So sometimes we often have to collect information from people, but I think what's really important is trying to loop back the best way you can and asking, is this correct? Have we missed anything? Do you have any other thoughts? How can, going through in a circle process that's about being iterative and asking again and re-asking in a way that's not annoying, because no one wants to be asked 100 times, but in a way that is making sure that we're capturing voice in a way that is true to what people are saying. And that's one of the biggest things about our work, is just trying to do it in collaboration with the people so that we're sharing their stories in the way that they want them to be shared. Okay, you can click on the next. So one of the things that I've been really working on lately is this idea of not comparing statistics of Indigenous people to non-Indigenous people. So, we often get this idea that, and I'm definitely guilty of doing it. So if only, I'm just throwing out random numbers, but if only 50% of Indigenous people graduate from high school and 70% of non-Indigenous people graduate from high school, we're comparing those two groups of people together. Oh, well, only these people have this, and then non-Indigenous people have this. And what I've stopped doing is just that. Indigenous people have different lived experiences and different historical experiences than non-Indigenous people. And I think that one of the things that we need to stop doing is expecting Indigenous people's communities, worldviews, perceptions to be the same as non-Indigenous people's, because they're not going to be. And I think that having this idea that we need to compare Indigenous points and non-Indigenous has kind of gotten into the trouble that we're in now. So thinking that Indigenous people's way of life, what good as Euro-Western cultural ideas, Judeo-Christian religion is somehow better than Indigenous religion, has got us creating a binary of this is better, and then we need to impose our beliefs on them. And so I think what I've been trying to do recently is just present information that's, this is the Indigenous truth, this is the information we've gathered, and we're not going to compare it to a non-Indigenous experience, because it's not the same experience, and it won't be, and there's no reason to compare it. It's okay to let the Indigenous experience stand on its own without comparison to something that doesn't maybe draw information that's necessary or creates a conversation that's unnecessary. The other thing that I've kind of stopped doing is listing off all the vulnerabilities of Indigenous people to a primarily non-Indigenous audience. So I've been really aware of creating, why do we need this program? I don't like to be like, well, we have this and that, and oh, these are all the bad things in our community, because I've become more aware that the more Indigenous people have to say, these are all the things that are happening in our community that maybe are statistically, not great, or, that draw differences between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, creates this narrative that we need people to come into our communities and sort of rescue us or save us, or that we're not contributing to Canadian society, or that Indigenous people aren't taking part in things like employment or other things like that. And so I think that becomes a very dangerous way to create a narrative about what it is that Indigenous people doing and are doing in our community and the way that people see us. So I've been more aware of not presenting Indigenous people in a negative way to primarily non-Indigenous artists, audiences, because I think it's important to not keep the pervasive conversation going that we're in some sort of need of being rescued, or that we don't have our own ability to understand the opportunities and resources that we need in our communities to be successful. Okay, you can click on the next slide. The next thing that we've been doing is trying to innovate the way that we share information in the community. So one of the things that we've been doing is simplifying data when we can. So how can we make it more palatable and more interesting? How can we simplify things to make it less complicated for people to understand what it is that is needed? And for that reason, we really focus on recommendations. So what is the recommendation that we've learned from this? What is that? What can we do to be action focused? What is our voice in this? And how can we take research? Everyone always says, oh, this research study is going to sit on a shelf. So how can we take it from the shelf and make it more action orientated so that people can move forward with the information that they've gathered? What are they going to do with it? It's one thing to gather the information, but maybe focusing on the action of that information. And then we've definitely been using technology. So the ways in which we present it. So the intention of the information gathering was to say, build awareness towards anti-racism. How can we be actionary about bringing attention to anti-racism, building awareness, and building off the information that we gathered in an action-focused way that invites people to have a greater understanding of that issue based on the information that we've gotten, versus sharing information with people and then not knowing sort of what to do with it. Or if the intention was to bring awareness, just bring the awareness based on the information that you have. That's maybe not making great sense, but the next slide will make more sense. If you could click to the next slide. So a little bit about Della's story. So the intentionality of Della's story, it's a virtual escape room that talks about the 60s scoop. And what we learned was that we were working on our magazine, we were collecting information about the 60s scoop and people's level of understanding of the 60s scoop. And instead of just sharing that information we had collected, or people's lack of knowledge, or trying to write it out, we created an escape room to engage people in the sort of chaos that survivors of the 60s scoop had to go through when they got sort of their information from the government, or when they were part of that class action lawsuit. So maybe if you could just play the video, I think it'll give people a greater understanding.
Della's Story is a hosted virtual escape room that allows teams of 3 to 8 people to uncover clues while discovering the story of a 60s scoop survivor. The teams are positioned as junior scientists from the future that are tasked with placing memories from a residential school classroom, an old barn, and an office to unlock a final room. During the project, almost 300 people navigated the memories of Della, the central character, to understand her history and pathway toward healing. Learning from the escape room acts as a conversation starter and contributes to team building. Combined with New Tribe magazine and debriefing from trained facilitators, Della's story is an engaging way to expand your knowledge.
Perfect, thank you. So Della's story was this idea that instead of sharing information with people in sort of like pie charts and you know, all of these sorts of things, maybe we could share it with in a way that's like interactive and engaging them and uncovering their own story. So we click to the next slide. So what we found from that was that 98% of people increased their understanding of the 60 scoop from participating in Della's story. And 100% felt more engaged in truth and reconciliation activities after attending Della's story. So we know that we did what the research or the information gathering was meant to do, which was to increase people's awareness. And we were able to integrate our information into a fun, interactive way that also launched people into conversations about a topic that is kind of dark and makes people sort of uncomfortable, but they were still able to learn because it was interactive and engaging. You want to click on the next slide. So UC was also tasked to do anti-racism efforts in the city. And what we did was we created a trail called Treaty 7 Trivia. And it was it's a GPS app like Pokemon Go, but it's at Fort Calgary in Calgary. And you talk to a game show host and he tests your skills. So if you want to click on the video.
Bringing Power to Truth's Treaty 7 Trivia. Okay, welcome to Bringing Power to Truth's Treaty 7 Trivia. I'm your host, Dwight Farahat. As you walk Fort Calgary, you'll be challenged to learn about Treaty 7, the neighboring Indigenous nations, and learn more about the Indigenous people who make Calgary their home. You can click the menu in the left corner to check out the trail map and head to your first trivia question. I'll see you there.
So if you could just click on the next slide, sorry. So we were able to utilize GPS to encourage people to learn more about Treaty 7, to reduce instances of racism in people's lives. So learning from the information and then enacting the information in a way that people can gain insight into the community through something that's engaging and fun and uses technology. And also both in Della's story and in Treaty 7 Trivia, they're either online or outdoors. And so it kind of is a little bit pandemic proof. But we know that the downloads of IndigiTrails was about 3,000 people. And we had so many people come back to us and say how much it meant to them and how much strength and ability and resiliency it brought into their lives. And they felt better equipped to go out and take part in reconciliation activities and be part of healing and wellness themselves. Okay, if you want to click on the next slide, I think that's it for me. So I just left some contact information for people that want to know more about us. And I think that I stuck into my little time slot, but thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Leanne. That was awesome and exciting to see some of that augmented reality and virtual reality kind of like in motion and making a big impact. So thanks so much for sharing. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and her beautiful flower background. Hello. Let me just make sure that you have the ability to share your screen. Give me 1 second here.
Here we go. I'm here. Got it.
Yay. Okay, good. Awesome.
I'm just gonna.
Great.
Awesome.
Take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Leanne, for your presentation. I heard a lot of alignments between your work and our work. So we can just jump in. Oh, whoops. Sorry, guys. Get a preview here. So my name's Jessica Slater. I was the lead facilitator for Skookum Lab, now known as Skookum Surrey. And I was just hired as the Director of Indigenous Priorities for the Vancouver Foundation last June. And so here to tell you, I don't know why it's going back to here we go. So Tanse, Wapaske, Pasquamistos, Esqueo, Nasigasan, Ochequisipi, Cree Nation, Treaty 5 Ochinia. My Cree name means white buffalo woman, and my mom's from Fisher River Cree Nation, which is about 2 hours north of Winnipeg, a part of Treaty 5. And my dad is first generation English settler. And I grew up and am currently residing again on the unceded, unsurrendered shared territories of the Katzie and Kwantlen people in what's now known as Maple Ridge, BC. I come into this work as an artist, and coming into programming and coming into now work in philanthropy, I think bringing in our unique gifts is really important because it gives us a specialized perspective on how to engage in this work. And so I really credit my background as an artist to allow me to really have that design thinking and systems thinking approach, very visual approach. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey to say the least. Some of the core values of my work have been to honor our ancestors and recognize that we are living, breathing actualization of our ancestors' prayers. And we want to walk in a good way so that we can become future ancestors to the next 7 generations. And a part of that in our journey here, Earthside, is to actualize our sacred gifts. So the way I was taught from my aunties is that each and every one of us have a sacred gift that we carry. And our job in this lifetime is to nurture that gift, to connect with others in a good way, to be in good relation, and to actualize the gifts in our community in order to serve our communities in a good way. And then, of course, always thinking about the next 7 generations. So how will our work implicate future relations that are coming? And we call that in our language Chapan or Chapanak, which means, we're honoring that line that comes from our ancestors through us to the future generation. So when we pray, we really think a lot about that family line. And I was given the name White Buffalo Woman because my auntie said that the White Buffalo teachings were about exactly that, bringing change for the next 7 generations, and that the young people of today are really going to be faced with some of the most intense barriers, intense social, economic, and environmental issues, of many generations. And so in order to work with those young people in a good way and actualize their gifts, I was given that name, which I try and honor every day. Oh my gosh, sorry. So started working in Surrey about 7 years ago. Again, coming in as an artist, we were doing a lot of youth programming there for Indigenous youth, really focusing on youth that had been in foster care, survivors of the foster care system. And we always did all of our programming through art. And at the time, funders were saying, well, we want to fund youth advocacy. We want to teach youth to be advocates. We're not just going to fund a youth group. And I said, well, in order to create systems change, you have to create the conditions for people to thrive in this work in a really trauma-informed way. And you can't just ask people that, have been and are continually traumatized by systems in Canada to immediately be able to advocate. So we really focused on building safe containers in relation to the land-based nations, which I'll go into in a bit. And then really honoring the diverse ancestries of all the folks that call Surrey home. And this was a mural that we did. Each of these designs here represent 1,000 Indigenous people, because through our early research, we found that Surrey was home to the largest Indigenous population in BC and had been systemically left out of a lot of funding and resources. So we get glommed into Metro Vancouver a lot. But what we found was there was virtually very little services that were culturally safe for Indigenous communities. We only had 4 Indigenous-led organizations in the region. And so we really started to learn a lot. And during this time was when I was asked to come onto Skookum Lab, which really opened my mind about the possibilities that can come from uplifting youth voice. So Skookum Lab, we were one of the first Indigenous-led social innovation labs in North America, and that's kind of like a real wordy term for something that Indigenous people have been doing since time immemorial. Indigenous people have always been systems thinkers. We've always heavily relied on our interconnectedness, not just with other humans, but with the land, with the water, and with you know, things like the trees and the rocks that we relate to as our grandfathers, as our grandmothers. And we've always taken an approach where we can see that interconnection from that bird's eye view and then work together to find solutions. So we started this social innovation lab because Surrey had the highest rate of Indigenous child and youth poverty in Western Canada. And these rates were on par with places like Peru and Brazil. And my sister at the time, who was an ED in the region, said, you know, I'm ready to call the Human Rights Tribunal because nothing is happening here. And so we got to work. So here are like the conditions that you need for systems to actually change. And what we were really wanting to change in our system were these mental models, really trying to promote that transformative, long-lasting change. You know, there's high rates of Indigenous systemic racism in the region, coupled with lack of resources. And then, yeah, so there's a lot of different things at play. And then another piece that we really wanted to, that I'll be mostly focusing on today, are the voices. So the relationships and the connections, what do we need to do to embolden our community to be able to speak on behalf of their needs and their families? And also to really surface the power dynamics that exist in terms of our sovereignty as Indigenous people living in colonial systems that govern us. So, you know, and then of course, when you hopefully do that systems change, things like policies, practices, and resource flows are going to be a part of that too. So in this work, I want to humbly acknowledge that we were doing this work on the unceded territories of the Semiahmoo, Kwantlen, Katzie, Kakite, Coquitlam, and Tsawwassen First Nations in the lands of what's now known as Surrey, BC. And it was really important that through our model, we had the foundation of honoring those land-based nations in a good way, specifically around reciprocity, bringing folks in to guide our work, to validate our work, to make sure that we're being respectful of the lands that we're on, and we're treading lightly. And we developed really great relationships with the local land-based nations. This is us at Kwantlen First Nation, you know, and then when we moved to COVID, everything went online. So we were always over there filming, drumming and singing and things like that for our online gatherings. But Kwantlen and Semiahmoo particularly have been heavily involved in all of our processes. This is a youth, Michael Kelly Gabriel. He's a cultural ambassador. He's Chief Marilyn Gabriel's son. And this is a picture of him leading an honoring ceremony, a blanketing ceremony for the Skookum Lab elders. And we wanted to recognize their journey, you know, of being displaced, both culturally and from their homelands, to come into the city for opportunities and really honor them for their contributions to our work. So it was really beautiful to kind of see these tables turned a little bit, where youth is conducting a ceremony for our elders. Usually it's the other way around. And a lot of these youth reported that they had never had a coming of age ceremony or naming. So it was really profound. And this is how we grounded all of our work and ceremony. And then, of course, have this beautiful, rich, diverse, urban Indigenous community in Surrey that represent many nations across Turtle Island. Many people there are Métis, I think around 46% of all urban Indigenous folks. A lot of Plains people like myself, and then coastal people are represented there too. But it's just such an incredible diversity, and we really wanted to hone in on that diversity and make space for people's own teachings and ceremonies and protocols and practices to come into the work and give them their space to really bring their identities into the work and bring that continual identity work in as well. I think as urban Indigenous people, that didn't grow up in the culture, it is a journey to come back and connect. And so for us, it was really important to make space for that work to happen. So this is a methodology I created based on the teachings from my homelands. My aunties are like expert star blanket makers, and there's a lot of teachings that go along with them. But what I really loved about the star blanket was the origins come from the buffalo robes, actually, which when you're given a buffalo robe, it was a marker in your life, a rite of passage to honor things like births, deaths, marriages, or accomplishments. And of course, in order to starve us onto reserves, the buffalo were decimated as a way to control Indigenous folks. So being very innovative as we were as Cree people, we made really good relations with the newcomers to the area, specifically Ukrainian people and Eastern European people who brought this quilting technique. And so we married our teachings of that morning star that you would find painted on those buffalo robes with these quilting techniques to make the star blanket. And then how I brought it into the work is that in our engagement, we would go to all these community gatherings, which was a great way to let people know about our work, about our project, what we're hoping to do. And we just asked one question: what would make Surrey the best place for an Indigenous child and youth? And people came back with all these different answers. I think we got thousands of answers throughout all of our engagement. And then we engaged an Indigenous-led consulting company, Reciprocal Consulting, to do an evaluation of that data, which surfaced themes that people in the region were really passionate about and where they saw gaps in services for children and youth. And the other thing about this method too, I'll say, is that it also recognizes that each individual contribution is part of a bigger system. So we need to hone that gift. We need to bring it to community to really make our communities strong and healthy. So as I said, we had a big focus on youth that were in and from care. A lot of these youth had children of their own. And what we were finding was that, once you have a file on you as a child, you're immediately given a file if you have a child. So we were seeing in real time this policy play out that was creating incredible barriers, and moving goalposts. So once the child was entered into care, these young moms wouldn't know how to get them back because the goals were always changing. So a part of our early work was really mapping the systems that youth encounter, especially ones in government care, and how we could advocate and create spaces for advocacy and policy change within our work. This is some of the youth from Skookum Lab. So we really tried to connect. At first, we had all these different guide groups. So we had youth, elders, Métis, service providers, and parents. And, we were gathering them and trying to do more age-specific activities. But what came out of it actually was youth wanted to gather with elders, and elders wanted to gather with youth. And so we started to create space for these intergenerational learnings to take place. And it was so beautiful to watch, because one thing that we heard from across every guide group was the incredible isolation in the region, because we don't have a cultural gathering space. We're not seen or reflected in the community. So just the very act by bringing community together to say engage in an art project or bead or have a meal, people started to make their own connections and build their own networks. And we call that revitalizing kinship systems. So, and I think that was the real success of the project, and really emboldened participants to step into advocacy and leadership roles. These are some of the elders from our group. We had some really cool, like, portrait taking activities, that really celebrated people coming from that strength-based perspective. We always hear these deficit-based statistics about ourselves, which can be incredibly traumatizing and also embed internalized bias. So we really wanted to come at this from a different standpoint, where we were celebrating the unique gifts of everyone that came into our circle. And it was, it was just such a beautiful experience to see people really glowing and smiling and coming into themselves. This is a workshop we did with graffiti artist Casey Hall. He's Celtic. Totally encourage you to check out his work. But just connecting through art, it's such a great way, because you're moving your hands and you're having these side conversations. And there was very little facilitated, in the traditional sense, where we're like teaching people or letting them know. We validate our research with them. We would just kind of have conversations, and what started to emerge were priorities for the community, especially the youth community, who I think, identified that mental health was a huge issue in the school system. And just having the barriers that they were experiencing, whether that's through racism, discrimination, or access to services. And this is one of our first projects where we brought a bunch of the families together to create this mural. And again, putting in, infusing these art pieces with data, and looking at what is it that you need to help create a city that will allow our families to thrive. And we look at data as sacred. It belongs to the folks that are giving it to us. We follow OCAP principles. I definitely encourage you to look into those. And we look at data as seeds. So when we plant these seeds of community wishes, we can then nurture that soil for those seeds to grow and to actualize into something tangible. In our early work as well, we also did a lot of solidarity building in our youth communities with newcomer and refugee communities. At the time when I came into this work, the organization I was working for was actually experiencing a lot of interorganizational lateral violence. So this is whether that's through funding blocking or like jockeying, because a lot of non-Indigenous orgs had the Indigenous specific contracts. So when this organization started to grow, they were starting to get those contracts. And it was really unfortunate to see. And the one place that we found solace was actually with an organization that serves newcomers, refugees, and immigrants in Surrey. And so we really started to align our work. And what we found was by connecting Indigenous and newcomer refugee youth, that the stories and the commonalities started to surface, and communities started to build in this really exponential way. And another really interesting thing about this work was that the newcomer youth were reporting that bias against Indigenous people was immediately embedded in their family systems upon arrival to Canada, which signaled to us that systemic racism is woven into the fabric of our society and is an unfortunate reality that is just so easily absorbed by people even coming here, in the last 6 months or a year. So what was really cool was newcomer youth would take these stories home and start having conversations in their own families about dispelling some of the myths and misconceptions around Indigenous people. And so that was a really powerful tool that we saw to create that transformational change around mental models and values. This is the pride and joy of my work with Skookum Lab. So once we built that community, we started to see emergence from these groups of Indigenous leaders, and they just all happened to be women. And so we decided to start the Skookum Labs Ambassadors Program. And this was a group of Indigenous women in the region, many of whom were youth, to really step into those leadership and advocacy roles. And, you know, some of these ambassadors shared their stories at our campfires, they were called. You know, we'd bring together community with policymakers and what we call systems entrepreneurs, which is a technical term for people that can move the dial on an issue. And by some of these women sharing their stories, it actually led to policy change in the region. So it's, for me, it's about how do we create connections, create spaces for the right people to hear the stories in a safe way, to create that long-term sustaining change and advocate on our behalf to the provincial and federal governments. So just to retrace, some of our approaches, our methodologies, taking a community-centered approach. So letting community lead, you know, not being prescriptive. We went into community and said, what do you want? What do you want to do? How do you want to approach this? How do you see Indigenous child and youth poverty affecting our families? Why do you think this issue's in place? And surfacing that helped us to really systems map what was keeping this issue in place, and then figure out our next steps, our prototyping. So I really pride our work on being community-led, that we are co-creators, that we are facilitators really to create containers and space for work to happen, and we're not prescriptive in our approaches. And, you know, oftentimes we are brought into consultation and things like that, and then our voices aren't listened to. So people will collect incredible amounts of data from Indigenous people and then just do whatever they wanted anyway. So we really took an Indigenous-led approach to data collection, stewarding that data in a meaningful way, and looking at data as sacred. And I think that, oh, sorry, hello? Oh, so I heard someone talking. And then again, honoring the diverse worldviews, perspectives, Indigenous knowledges that are coming into this work, while honoring the land-based nations first and foremost. And then the third most powerful thing was creating those pathways to kinship. So revitalizing kinship systems, allowing those networks to grow and to flourish. And being in good relations with each other. You know, I can't stress enough how when working in Indigenous communities, hearing that word reconciliation can be quite triggering, considering all of the ongoing policy issues in Canada today. So we really took a different approach of calling it being in right relations and being in good relations, not only with each other, but also with other communities. And, you know, unpacking some of that internalized bias, internalized shame, internalized oppression, and kind of taking almost a somatic approach and unpacking that out of our bodies, I think really helped to foster lateral liberation, and which is a term coined by my friend Kim Haxton. And it's a real way out of lateral violence that we find in a lot of our communities and organizations. So we're very clear about our approaches and the boundaries that we create in order to ensure safety in our work, especially working with community. And you know, really, when we would gather, we would have these incredible gatherings. This is from a gathering that we did on ending anti-Indigenous racism in the Surrey region. And, you know, finding those networks, building solidarity, hearing from all of the voices in the room, you know, not privileging a few, because what we found was everybody had something to contribute. And when you equalize those power structures and revitalize like our more circular approaches, holistic approaches, incredible wisdom would come in. And we saw incredible changes, recommendations made in our community. And then also that intergenerational learning piece. So bringing elders and youth together, you know, I think is a part of colonialism that really impacted our the way that we live and the way that we learn. And so, you know, we look at how elders are treated in Western society, you know, back home, I hear about stories pre-contact, the elders were the ones to look after the babies, to look after the youth, to mentor them and teach them. So when you're revitalizing these ancestral roles, you're just seeing people like come alive and step into their gifts in such a beautiful way. And it was so meaningful to both the elders and the youth that we worked with to be able to build those organic relationships and networks. And then being in an urban environment, you know, it's can be really complex. You know, there's a lot of different cultures, different ancestries at play, but one tenet of Skookum Lab, and now as our work continues into the Vancouver Foundation and the philanthropic sector, is around belonging. So how can we, you know, really create belonging? How do we feel that we belong? Our identity is strong, and that we belong to a community that is healthy and thriving, and then that our communities belong. So asserting our ancestral and sovereign rights on that nation to nation level with the federal government, which, you know, just really brings it back home. And I think the way we decolonize is to create spaces of belonging, to make people feel like they matter, that they have gifts to share in our communities, that our communities need in order for us to thrive. And I really love this model. This is from Dr. Laboucaine Benson, a Cree scholar, that really shows our interconnected worldview. Again, starting from the individual. So learning how to host ourselves, learning about ourselves and our history, how to heal our own trauma, to be able to step into this work in a good way, into our families, recognizing the systems that impact our families and the experiences of our families, and then stretching that into community, nation, our natural environments, and the spirit world. And so we see that when we do this work, you know, no matter where we are working in this spiral, it implicates all of life, all the structures of life. And so that interconnectedness is really important, I feel like. So we are very mindful of the steps that we're taking to do this work in community, and maybe what implications it might have on this bigger systemic picture. So that's about it for me. This is our website. I'm happy to send out these slides. If anyone has, like, I'm really excited about our conversation this afternoon. And yeah, Chantel, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Honestly, I could listen to both you and Leanne just talk about this for the rest of the day. I feel like I don't need to say anything really. So thank you so much to you both for your generous sharing over the last hour. We're going to take a 5-minute break so that our translators' minds can just rest for a moment and not have to think in 2 languages. And for all of us just to stretch and move around a little bit. And then we'll come back after that 5 minutes and have time for you two to be in discussion with each other and answer any questions that might come up. So everyone enjoy the next few minutes. Thank you. All right, everybody. Welcome back. I think that was about 5 minutes. I actually realized that I totally forgot to check the time before we left. Welcome back, everybody. So as we get settled into like these more discussion parts of the afternoon, if you want to let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat, that would be great. The territory that you're on and the organization that you're with, however it is that you'd like to introduce yourself to the group, that's great. We love to know where everybody's from, who everybody is, kind of the same thing sometimes. So I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat yet, but I have lots of questions. Honestly, I could just talk with you both for the next hour, but I want to make sure that we have spot for the youth themselves to give voices to what it is that they're thinking about and doing. I do have a question that I think both of you touched on during the course of your presentations, which is the role of art and technology and getting youth involved with the work that you're doing, and in them, kind of having the space to create their own knowledge through that. So I'm wondering if you folks could speak a bit more about some of that work that you're doing and what that looks like in your unique locations.
Sure, I can start us off if you want. Yeah, so with COVID, I feel like technology was really needed. And there was a lot of issues around accessibility, especially with internet connection. Like even us being in an urban environment, internet connectivity is an issue, especially for low-income families. So we were able to secure some funding through COVID relief, and we were able to supply families with computers, iPads, and then also pay for their internet connections to make sure that they could stay in contact, especially in those early months of the COVID lockdown. So that was really important. And then, we were very respectful of the Health Canada guidelines. So when they did start to open up, we gathered outside, and that, because just there's nothing better than being in person, I feel like. And then, of course, art played an incredible role, because I feel like just doing something with your hands and not just like having to sit there, like I'm always beading in every meeting that I'm at, because I feel like I can really ground myself, center myself, and then it just kind of makes way for these organic conversations to spring up. Yeah, so I love the use of art in our programs as an artist, and we definitely incorporated that all throughout what we did.
Yeah, same. So with COVID, everything, like, so you say over the last, since 2018, we've been developing virtual reality games. We have 3 virtual reality games. So we've been taking like headsets, like VR headsets to classrooms and communities, and engaging people in like doing 360 video and getting youth excited about entering into the tech industry. And then we have like a pandemic. Well, no one wants to put a headset on in a pandemic, and so we had to re-strategize about how we were doing some of that work. And same thing, like we ran into a lot of issues with not only were like youth, they had a lot of access to technology, but it wasn't the right technology that they needed. So like, oh, now all of a sudden you have 6 kids, say, in a house, and you have a PlayStation and some phones and a couple of tablets, but no one has the Chromebooks that they need, or the laptops that they need, and all of these different things. And then like the internet would be down and everyone would be doing it, would be so laggy, and it was just so hard. And then also kids were at school all day on computers when they went online. And then we were asking them to sit on a computer for like a beading class or a ribbon skirt making class or a cookie design class. And it was just so hard to do that. And so we had to be really creative and again, like really respecting the health guidelines, but also like figuring out how to make it like fun and interesting and different. And so we would like, what we did was we just delivered things to people's houses, primarily art, because that's the way, again, like you engage with your hands and you feel connected to something and there's an exchange, And so we would deliver crafting kits to their house and sewing machines to their house and heart-shaped pizzas that we just delivered last week for Valentine's Day that's coming up, and cookie decorating. And like we even did STEM classes. So we got people actually involved in like coding and STEM through giving them STEM kits and then teaching them STEM via Zoom or pre-recording Zoom chats where they could interact with like the kits that were in front of them. And that made a huge difference. Just moving it from sitting and listening to being tangible made all the difference in the world. And so that's sort of, we did like what we always do, is like we just adapted and blended and created like different ways of connecting with people. And I think that was the hugest thing. And then obviously, like you say, has augmented reality apps. We have 4 different augmented reality apps where we involve art and technology and GPS, and then we do target images. So we bring murals to life through technology, and we can create oral tradition components through written objects too, which is amazing. And so trying to like find that world where kids exist as youth, but they also exist as Indigenous people.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing about that. That's a really hard balance. I feel like I think that when people think about, like youth programming and how do we include youth and get youth more like engaged and involved, like kind of the fallback is like technology. Like youth are on social media and like on technology all the time. But yeah, there's got to be that balance of like we're also, people with like bodies and hearts and minds like existing in the world as well, and that needs to be engaged too. And maybe Ravina and Zarek can speak to that a bit as well. But I'm just wondering, is there anybody in the virtual audience who have a question before I ask another one? I just want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to ask a question.
Yeah, and while we're waiting, I'll add to, we really connect with a lot of people through beading, and I love beading, like I'm a bit obsessed, but elders and youth were both learning how to bead, and then we moved that all online, and we just had this like, generative space where people could pop on and make whatever they're working on. And so that really, I felt like held us through COVID, having that online space where there's no facilitation. It's just like come and be in a virtual room together. And it was really incredible to see everyone like learn and like start to make bigger and bigger projects over COVID. And now a lot of our participants are actually like selling their work and finding this really cool like economy through making artwork and selling it. So, and we've actually started a Skookum Surrey Arts Collective that Ravina has really been instrumental for. And so going to markets with everyone's work. And so that's a really nice way to connect with the larger community as well.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Okay, I don't see any questions. I do have a question that I think Jessica is very well positioned to answer with her role with Vancouver Foundations, but Leanne, I'm betting that you have something to say about this as well, so feel free to answer as well. But Jessica, you had spoken to like systems change. You both spoke about like the various oppressions and like challenges that Indigenous people face. And like, I think that we're all aware that we can't count on the government to provide funding in the ways that we need and for the things that we need. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to maybe a bit about the role of community and like even philanthropy in supporting what youth are doing and the kinds of things that that your organizations are trying to do.
Yeah, sure. It's a real interesting time to come into the philanthropic sector. I've been on the other side for 12 years of applying for grants. And so I feel like the philanthropic sector is in an incredible time of transformation right now. I really look up to the work of Chris Archie at the Circle on Aboriginal Philanthropy to connect, settler-led philanthropic organizations with Indigenous-led work, and in a really good way. They've also, so with our foundation, we had a very small pot of money. I think it was $750,000 if we could grant it by the end of the fourth quarter in 2021. And we also were really, mindful of engaging, because a lot of First Nations and Indigenous orgs across BC don't know that we serve them. So we did that real dedicated engagement, and we ended up getting 240 applications with over $11 million in ask, which to us signaled like the incredible need across many sectors, especially around supporting communities with things like grief and, all of these emerging impacts with COVID. So our granting stream was around healing, belonging, and community inclusiveness. And it could be whatever you needed, like capacity dollars, core dollars. If you needed a new hot water heater that allowed you to do your programs, you could apply for any of that. And we were able to, the foundation, I'm really proud of working with the foundation, so early on, they were able to drum up close to $7 million for this ask, because we have to be really careful about what we're asking community to do. So, I feel like a lot of the new transformative movements within philanthropy is moving to trust-based philanthropy, where we're not asking organizations to create these huge, complicated applications that really privilege Western academic ways of thinking. Instead, we, are moving to oral applications. Our application had 5 questions. There was no budget required. There's no reporting required. And I think that, taking off that administrative onus on our nations and communities really opened the floodgates for how many people applied. And then another thing that we're trying to do at the Vancouver Foundation is looking at how we can share and shift power. So, because we have a large endowment, it comes with a lot of power in community. And so how can we give that power back to communities, especially in the context of being on unceded territories? And being very realistic about how wealth has been generated in this province. And, what is our responsibility to now give back and fund Indigenous-led work on their own terms? So that's kind of some of the work I'm involved in now. And in terms of funding youth specifically, there isn't a lot of youth funding. The federal funding, was cut during the Harper era and came back a little bit, but not quite to what it was. So we're seeing real gaps in youth funding and real gaps in funding for kids aged 6 to 13. So, we have all the $0 to $6 and then youth 16 to 30, but that age group, there's no dedicated funding. And that's a really formative time, I feel like, where we can start to build foundations that lead into those youth years. So we are running a youth BIPOC granting stream this year. But really, what I'm seeing as a trend across the sector is granting calls that are really open, that you can use for whatever age group. So I'm hoping that through those, folks doing this good youth work, we'll be able to get funds there.
Yeah, I mean, what a genius Jessica is, right? She's brilliant. What she just said is absolutely 100% what I'm seeing too, is the trend. I'm not on the funder side. I honestly don't do a lot of donor relation stuff, but what I'm seeing is the same thing, a shift from an adversarial relationship with funding and donors and seeing charities as somehow trying to I don't know what they this adversarial relationship in which you felt like you couldn't connect to funders or you couldn't ask for changes. I said this morning in another meeting where we all have to look into our crystal ball and predict there will be 15 youth. They will all need bus passes. 4 out of the 15 will need childcare. 3 will need this. 50% will go to school. And then if you don't achieve that 100% perfectly, you felt like you couldn't, that you hadn't lived up to the expectation of the funder. And even that you couldn't have a conversation with the funder, you couldn't negotiate. And all other industries have the ability to be flexible and be strategic and think about what their communities need and shift their goals, but not charities. Charities have to somehow be able to predict exactly what will happen in multi-barriered communities with very vulnerable people and somehow predict it perfectly in a way that, you felt like you really couldn't. And I have noticed, I've been an executive director a long time, longer than I started when I was only 25. But, I've been an executive director for a long time, 15 years. And I have seen, especially in the last 5 years, a dramatic shift to being more collaborative and giving more power back into community and allowing us to be more strategic with how we utilize funding, and not just from an Indigenous perspective, but from funding and all the relationship between funders and charities and how we're looking at how that relationship could be. I have noticed that there is a shift. I mean, we have so much work to do, and we know that a lot of the charitable sector is from a very colonial approach and sort of the savior complex and all of these different patriarchal systems that are embedded in charities. And so we have to sit in our own truth as charities and as the charitable structure and philanthropy and sit in that and rethink those structures. But I think the work is happening. It's at least starting to happen. And I think that there's a brilliant shift towards that. So I think that from a charitable perspective, the work that Jessica just mentioned, it's being well received.
Yeah, thanks so much, Leanne. And one thing I really want to add too is that Indigenous-led organizations and nations, we know, have to do up to 25 times the amount of reporting that mainstream organizations have to do. So there is this like systemic racism. I think that's really rooted in bias that we can't manage our own funds, which is a wild misconception. So, you know, I really want to be intentional too. Like if you take an Indigenous led organization that's getting a contract, say from the government, it's also usually about 75% of the dollars that they would give for mainstream programs, even though you're serving the same amount of people. So we're seeing vast differences for Indigenous-led organizations that I think really needs to be made explicit, and we need to start advocating to break down some of those barriers, because we get so, you must know, Leanne, like the busy work of reporting takes up so much capacity, and then, you know, what is left for the community work that we're aiming to do?
Yeah, I mean, you don't get, if you don't have a dedicated person, like I am the person, you know what I mean? Like if you don't have that person that can sit and write every day, all day long, reports and proposals and all of the things, then your organization isn't going to be successful. And you have to have a dedicated staff person for that, which I know a lot of people don't have the capacity to do. You know, they don't have the capacity to, or the infrastructure to be able to offer that. You know, one risk I think with switching to, you know, oral traditions or reducing the capacity at organizations is that sometimes Indigenous organizations are asked to do an oral presentation and a written presentation. And I'm like, how is this making it easier for Indigenous organizations? Now we have to just do double. We have to both write what a non-Indigenous agency and describe it in a meeting. And so I caution people is like moving into those systems, just be aware that like you're asking the equitable amount of participation.
Yeah, no, for sure. We offer as an option. So you, and then what I want to move to visiting as reporting, like let's have a cup of tea over Zoom and talk about your work, or let me come to your community and see what you're doing, and like really be explicit about the power dynamics too in that work. And then, you know, a lot of other things have come up through our work around data sovereignty. So, you know, if you're asking for these huge reports, what happens with that knowledge? Does it just sit on a shelf? Like, why are you asking us to prepare all of this? So we're shifting now to ask communities, especially around systems change, what reporting, what knowledge gathering is helpful for you, is helpful for your cause, and how can we shift some of that onus back onto the foundation to be gathering that data and stewarding that data for the projects that we're funding.
Oh, I feel like
that's the chef tip right there.
Yeah, I feel like this is just like a conversation that really needs to be had across the board. Like I'd put in the chat, like I am that person for an organization that supports like student survivors. And it's the same for us too, like even as a nonprofit, it's really awful. Yeah, this is just like a really important conversation to be having. And I will note too, I just was talking to Jean-Francois, who's one of the national co-chairs for NUICC and is also the person for the friendship centers in Quebec. And they're actually starting to do, like with the friendship centers that fall under the province, is they're starting to do that visiting as reporting model, like amongst themselves. So that's really exciting to see too.
Yeah, and also like when you're a nonprofit, a lot of the time our applications, like you need to show all these deficits around our communities. Like what is the need? What is the need? So we're backing that up with facts that, you know, are systemic in nature, you know. So I really want to move away from that as well into a more strength-based perspective, especially when we're looking at Indigenous-led systems change and really highlighting Indigenous brilliance and ingenuity that exists already in our communities. And like, we don't need these prescriptive approaches from government to, you know, get us out of this, you know, that's how we've been put here. So that's been a really interesting part of the work, is like shifting from requiring all these deficit-based statistics.
I've refused to write them, which is what I said. Like I refuse to be like, my community sucks and here's all the reasons it sucks. I'm just like, I'm not going to write why my community sucks, but here's all the reasons that you should invest in my community, because we're brilliant, we're innovators, we're unique. You know, we have all these opportunities that and contribute so much to our communities. And here's the reasons you should invest, not because our community is crap, but because our community is brilliant. And your investment in our community will heighten that brilliancy for more contribution and greater health for future generations. And I'm not going to sit here and list off all the reasons that we're terrible anymore. I just refuse to do it, because it's not good for me, and it's not good for the people reading it to hear how Indigenous people feel that we're in a deficit and that we need someone to come in and save us. I don't think that's the case.
No. And we did ask in our latest granting stream, you know, what are the larger needs of your community? Because not that we want to show the deficit, but we want to show the gaps. We want to hold systems accountable for creating the conditions for these gaps to occur. So I think it's like a subtle shift, but I think it's a really important one where, you know, we are embedding accountability, I guess, into the stories that people are telling us, and maybe what are some of those systemic causes for those impacts that, you know, are occurring.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Like, please stay tuned. I really want to be in touch with you because this is definitely like this area of like funding is definitely like near and dear to my heart. And I think we need to like collectively figure out like how we can take on some of these issues and like really like move the needle on this. So stay tuned. I'm going to be in touch about it. But I do want to make space for Ravina and Zarek to talk about the things that they want to carry into this space. We've kind of left it open for them to share whatever it is that they want to share. So yeah, I just want to make the space here for them to call them into this space. And if we have to run a couple minutes late or like forego having breakout rooms or whatever that needs to look like, I just want to make sure that they have the opportunity to do that sharing and have the space. I mean, you're who we're actually here for. Like we can't talk about, you know, like remembering youth power and not make the space for you. So Ravina, if you'd like to go first, because I have your name first on my list here, just introduce yourself and carry what it is that you want into this space. And then, yeah, we'll put you two in dialogue with each other similarly, if that works for you.
Thank you so much, Chantel. Hi, everyone. My name is Ravina Morgan. My pronouns are she, her. My traditional name is Amupiasis Isqueo, which means hummingbird woman in Cree. And my mom is Chippewayan Dene Cree Métis, and my dad is a second-generation immigrant from India. And I am here today on the shared unceded territories of the Kétsi, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kakite, and Coquitlam First Nations. And I just want to say thank you so much to Jessica for her amazing presentation on Skookum Lab / Skookum Surrey. She really captured the work that Skookum has done, and she did it in such a good way that kind of already spoke to my experience. So I first started on with Skookum Lab in 2018. I was part of the youth guide group. So I wanted to share a little bit about that experience and how it's kind of inspired and given opportunities into my life today, and how life-changing that was. So one of the most important things I think that Skookum Lab understood right from the very beginning was how to meet like the most basic needs of youth, and they made sure that we were really well taken care of. So they modeled community care, and they also ensured that when we gathered, we had childcare, we had food, we had safe space, we had transportation. And so because all of those elements were taken care of, we got to turn off our survival mode, which was incredible. And being able to do that even for an afternoon and engage in parallel learning, which is like so decolonial in itself, was really impactful. And so I just wanted to speak a little bit to that, because we were able to share our experiences and be validated and heard and listened to, and they really made us feel like we we're the experts of our own stories, and we were, and that was incredible. And then being able to see that reflected back in reports and changes and campfires, and then in the systems change was just, it was, I have no words for it, actually. I have goosebumps because it was such an incredible experience that I had never even thought would happen in my lifetime. I thought, yeah, I just never thought that would happen for me and my son. So that was really special for sure. And there was also a little bit of talk about reciprocal relationships, and that was definitely something that I learned from Skookum Lab, is that everything was done in reciprocity. So while the gift cards were super appreciative, I mean, like, I was so appreciative for the gift cards, it was being heard and having opportunities to engage with youth, other youth as peers, and then elders as well. And so now, fast forward, how many years is 2022? I now have these relationships with folks in the community, and it's so beautiful because a lot of these elders are now like nannies and chinnies to my son, and we never had that before. Like, as urban Indigenous people, we're so violently displaced from our homelands. My mom's community is in the Northwest Territories, and for 5 generations we haven't lived in our territory, so we're pretty disconnected that way. And so to be able to have elders who treat you as family is just so moving and special, and there's no words for me to describe that. And so yeah, I just wanted to mention some of that too. And I'm just so grateful for Skookum Lab and the way that they engaged with community and with youth, because they also gave us opportunities to share what we learn. And so through like a mentorship model, Jessica was able to share her teachings with us in such a good way, and then we could go and share with our peers. And then through that model of like circle leadership, I'm now in a position with Skookum Surrey to have leadership in a good way in the community. And so Skookum Lab has just been life-changing for me and for my family and for my son. And yeah, it's been a really wonderful experience, and I'm very grateful.
Ravina has my old job, which is really cool.
That's really cool.
It's really
That
cool,
is
yeah.
really cool. Awesome. Zarek, do you want to take it away?
Hi, my name is Zarek. Well, my name is actually Nudesko Napi, which is a lone boy in Blackfoot. It's not my full name. It's kind of the cost of losing my connection to my family. My full name is actually a lone boy under the waterfall, but in my language, there's no general word for waterfall. So when my uncle had named me, he had a specific word for the end. But when he passed away, I never learned that word. I am Blackfoot and Dene. When I had started my journey, I came to the city in a very urban environment, and I had lost my connections to everything. I felt very disconnected. So going through schools and everything was trying to find a connection towards my people, but being sort of in a mixing pot with a bunch of other Indigenous children from different backgrounds and everything like that. So we learned off of each other. Everything that we knew about our traditional backgrounds, we taught it to another. I know words in Cree. I taught friends who are Cree that Blackfoot words, and together we kind of made our own community in the city. And going through high school, when we felt divided with a bunch of, we felt like outstanders in school, and that kind of brought us to make our own community with each other, where I was able to make a Indigenous student council. with each people that represent their own kind of community. It was a rocky start. A lot of people, they disagreed, you know, they brought a lot of historic incidents that happened in the past into the present, and I kind of had to bring them together and tell them, you know, when we go back to our each individual nations, we can feel that way. But right now, we're all disconnected. And the only way that we can get past that is being connected with each other and help each other. And I started learning to grow my voice as a youth person going through life in an urban environment. And being able to do that, it was hard because it was such a hard place to be. There is so much instances where I was in trouble, and in fact, I was trying to graduate high school and trying to be a role model within the community, but at the same time dealing with homelessness and such problems, battling stigmas. And even though I had a voice, it was hard to speak up on things. And so going through that time in my life, I joined a lot of programs, and there was one program that had stuck out to me, and that was USAY. So being in a city, being alone and being homeless, I had no connections to anybody. I had no family, I had no one to help. And USAY was that kind of place where I could feel connected, even more connected than I had already did with my Indigenous peers from high school. And so in doing so, they actually had became a family aspect to me while being alone in this time in my life. And they went above and beyond with supporting me as Indigenous youth. They had made me felt heard. They made my voice that I currently had, and they amplified it to a higher level. And I was able to speak on things and be on panels and talk with so much encouraging people. And I got to meet with others. I got to have more connections in a cultural sense. And I was actually reminded today, thanks to Jessica, one of the greatest lessons I learned from an elder was the 7 generations. And it helped me kind of inspire other Indigenous youth. I would teach it to anybody that I could. And I wouldn't have learned that lesson if it weren't for USAY, because I got connected with an elder through USAY. And they had supported me from high school to where I am now. And I was able to be a part where I had an idea of what I knew what I wanted to do with my life. And that was continuing on to support Indigenous youth as much as I can. I went to post-secondary. I got certified in becoming a youth worker, and I got to serve my practicum with USAY, and it was so great. I was able to help gather the information that Leanne had spoken about earlier. I was being able to create programs that would help Indigenous people. One of the most important programs I had helped with them were a program called the Sacred Space. The Sacred Space program has 2 locations, and the first locations where I was very happy about was the Child Advocacy Center. And it gave a space where, you know, Indigenous people would have a space within the Child Advocacy Center to help connect to people like elders and such and talk about hard subjects like abuse. And that being part of my history kind of made it feel so grateful to be a part of that program, as well as having another location at the Calgary Police Services headquarters in McKnight. And allowing us to have a space within the police station was so amazing. You know, having a space for Indigenous people to get help from other Indigenous people who are working at the police station and connecting with others again, with helping, so much being connected within that kind of system. Sorry, I'm just kind of still kind of getting my bearings a bit. But yes, they made it feel like I was a part of a community again, with being so disconnected in the city. And I'm forever grateful for that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. Yeah, it's always really hard to know what to say in a space. You did great though. I totally agree with JC. So I'm wondering if maybe instead of, getting everybody into breakout rooms and then getting everyone settled and then sharing with like the 15 minutes that we have left, if maybe we can put you folks into conversation with each other and have space for people who are attending to ask questions and be a part of the discussion with you. That might work better and also be less siloed. I think that's work that we're all trying to do, is make things less siloed. So if that works for you folks, kind of a shift in how we planned, okay. So if folks have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand and give voice to them. Or if you want to add anything to the conversation about the things that you're doing in your own work, feel free to put your hand up or put it in the chat. It's very welcome. I think just to get us started though, one question that I have, when we had titled, when we were trying to think of titles for this event, one word that, there's lots of words that come with baggage, but one of them is definitely empowerment, and the way that has become really depoliticized, and also, really focused on individual healing and who grants empowerment to who has the right to do that. So yeah, I think you folks are really well positioned to talk about what that really means for you and the work that you're doing and your communities. So yeah, I think if you can share a bit about your thoughts on this idea of empowerment, we've mentioned it a few times, that I would be very excited about that.
Well, I have a personal story about when I first started. So, I started at USAID 100 years ago. And when I first started, I was like, I'm going to empower everybody and I'm going to fix people and I'm going to give people what they need that I think that they need. And that is my version of empowerment, this kind of I'm going to fix everything. And I'm in this to fix people. And just the idea of fixing and empowerment for me was really something that was stuck in my head. And no one would come to our programs. We could barely give out 25 backpacks. It was just annoying, this dynamic at USAID to fix people, the idea that they didn't know what they needed and they just needed a little bit of opportunity or support, or Zarek said, connection. And I spent so much time being why doesn't people want to come to our program? We're so perfect and they just need to be perfect and everything is perfect and we're going to fix it. We're going to empower them. And, just this idea of again, the savior idea of charitable work. And then it was just trying to question my, can you imagine a 20-year-old trying to fix a 30-year-old woman with backpacks or something? It was just such a stupid idea, and I started to check myself and unravel it. And then this idea, I went to this elder meeting and this elder said, we're not doers, we're helpers. And then they started to talk about this. It was a Cree elder with a Cree teaching about the idea of visiting and being a visitor and having a guest. And that really stuck with me, this idea that your guests come, USAID is a place where our guests will come and we should treat them like family and give them opportunities and build connections and support them. But they come with all their ideas of what they need in their own life. They come with their own homes and their own supports and all of these things. And I don't need to fix anybody. And so my ideas of empowerment changed from someone as amazing as Zarek come to our organization equipped with all the things that he needs. He knows his own version of success. He's a talented artist. He's all of these amazing things, just seeking out connection and support and opportunities to be able to give back to his community. And so to me, it was like, well, what do you need? Let's just give you that. You know, like you already are a brilliant human being that knows what you need and is already empowered. We just need to like open up the gateway or like the floodgates to let all those opportunities come to you. And so I think that was just like getting out of the way of my own ideas of like fixing and empowerment and being all the like perfect things that you think that you need to do. And just like the recognition that Eric is a guest when he's at USay, and we're going to treat him like a guest, and we're a guest in his life. And that means treating somebody like family and building connection. And that's how you empower people to do the things that they need to do, like, and just get out of the way of fixing it. Anyway, that's my way, but that's how I've learned.
Yeah, I love that. I wonder, I often think about this word empowerment, and I'm like, does it assume that we don't have power, that we need power? And I think in our teachings, it doesn't matter what you're born into, that we are born with that gift. That is our power. So, it's the structures that take up our power away. It's not, us. So, yeah, I think about that word empowerment a lot. And what, how I look at it is like, we need to fund work that allows people to connect with their own power, with their ancestors, with their blood memory. I've had the honor to witness kids bringing back songs in their own language that they weren't raised with. Like, what is that? That is power. Kids raised in foster care, learning their languages and teaching their parents that they're reunified with. That to me is power. I feel like we have that power within us. And how can we advocate for people to recognize that power? I'm so sick of advocating for our humanity, to be treated with humanity. But yeah, that's my thought, is that we have power. It's we need to dismantle the structures that keep us from that power.
Ravina or Sarah, do you want to talk about your experiences with that idea or practice? No pressure. Just want to make sure that you are very welcome to take part in this conversation too. You've lived it.
Sure. I'm really sensitive to language, so words like vulnerable, won't use it, and empowered. That's another one that I am definitely have weird feelings with. But what Jessica said about like finding your gifts and sharing your at risk, that's a good one, and like lifting people up that way. I just want to say Jessica did that. So her ideas and her sharing her teachings, they work. And that's why I'm sitting here and I'm beating and thinking about our events next week and how nice it is to just sit, even though I can't see everybody here, but just being kind of together in a virtual space and being here and listening to these words. It's so calming and grounding from the everyday, the grind. But I definitely would say I don't like to use the word empowered. I like inspired. I like being held through community care and things like that. And I think that's what's really brought me into the place where I am in my life today. And I think that it works.
I'll add onto something. So I'm also very sensitive to language and everything like that. There's a bunch of words that have been used to like kind of put me down. Empowerment, I never actually felt true empowerment until later on in my life. Early life went to school in a small town, and unfortunately they didn't teach me how to read and write. And I later found out in an IPP that they said that I was a difficult child unwilling to learn. but really they just put me in another room and tell me to play while they were learning how to read and write. So words and language, I knew how to speak, but I wouldn't know how to read and write. And that was always so daunting to me. So it was very hard to be past that. And through the power of connections is where I found more empowerment and to get past that kind of problem. It's weird because I come from a family full of English backgrounds. My grandmother is an English teacher at the college level. My mother was an English teacher in a high school level and a librarian. And I was probably 10 years old, still reading picture books, getting the story through the pictures. And it wasn't until my auntie, who was a writer, she was a writer in poetry. I spent a summer with her and she taught me how to read and write. And from then on, I kind of practiced and practiced to the point where while in high school, I managed to get an award for an essay I wrote. And what I wrote about that essay was empowerment. And the idea of challenging the idea of our people having to fight with the racism within our community and saying that I was saying that we are not fighting other people, we're fighting ideas like racism, statistics, and stigmas. And having the problem with facing those without the proper empowerment. And just as it's kind of a point that kind of came into my mind when Jessica said, having powers and the gift of powers and everything like that kind of brought me back to an elder teaching that we were kind of all born with one power and one gift. And the elder told me that I had the gift, the power of understanding and the gift of determination. And using those things, we can help our community become better. So with that, I had a better understanding of the problems that we face in our community and the determination to find different solutions to help with that. And with that problem is, I seen another question that kind of wanted to tie it into this kind of whole big thing that I'm going on was the word funding. And how can we tie funding to empowerment? And with that, I mean, when I wasn't taught how to read and write, I spent my time learning about the Great American Pastime, which was power. And looking at the history in the background, my auntie would teach me the concept of power and how people would have power in the past. And just because people would have power, they would use it against other people to keep them on a level where they couldn't have that power to gain a kind of stability towards, sorry, I keep on reading these comments and they kind of like throw me off a bit. I promise this is all gonna connect. Just because you had more power does not mean that I would be at this level still. We would find different ways to learn how to become better as a community and as a people. And we had with that great saying with education is our buffalo. And many ways that we could learn and educate ourselves to become stronger as a community and face these problems. Sorry, I kind of took up a lot of time. I didn't mean to.
No, it's all good. I mean, the time is ours to share. Like, there's no need to apologize for taking up time. That's literally why you're here. I fear that we're like just 4 minutes away from the end of our time, and I'm always very, very conscious of running meetings over. Never a fan of that. We're all running on a very tight schedule. But I just want to take these last few moments to say I wish that we could keep talking for a very long time. And I hope that we do in the various ways that this work connects us and keeps coming up. And I just want to say thank you to Sarah and Ravina and Leanne and Jessica for taking time to share with us today all of this brilliance that you've put into this space. I mean, I've seen in the chat, you know, everybody's feeling very inspired and grateful for what it is that you're sharing. I myself am very grateful for having the opportunity to put you all in conversation with each other. This has been really great. And I hope that we can all carry this in the rest of our days and into a weekend. I hope that everyone also stays tuned for more events coming up from NUICC and the Indigenous Knowledge Mobilization Hub that this conversation is a part of. I see that in the chat that someone has dropped, you know, information about where you can find more about NUICC. The email address that's there is my email. If you'd like to ask me any questions or be more involved with the research that's happening through this work. And then also the fact that we have the call for papers for a pilot issue of a journal. So please know that in that we take the idea of research very broadly and welcome art, you know, opinion pieces, papers that you've written, whatever that might look like. We're very interested in seeing what it is that folks are thinking about and doing and how it is that they are sharing that knowledge. But yeah, I just want to close today thanking all of you for the teachings and work that you brought to this space. Even if you're just listening, that's a very important teaching too. And I hope that we see you all again very soon.
Thanks so much, Chantel and team and everyone else presenting today. Leanne, Ravina, Zarek, nice to see you all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.